In the quiet of night, certain names echo louder than others. Mary Magdalene is one such figure, an enigma whose shadow stretches across 2 millennia of contested history, suppressed texts, and whispered legends. While mainstream scripture portrays her briefly, apocryphal accounts and later traditions hint at a far more complex role, a teacher, a confidant, and perhaps a guardian of secret knowledge that threatened the emerging church. She is described as receiving private teachings, entrusted with wisdom too radical to be widely shared. Some legends suggest that her insights challenged patriarchal authority, elevated the spiritual role of women, and offered knowledge of divine mysteries hidden from the public. Over time, her story was deliberately minimized, portrayed as a penitent follower rather than a central spiritual authority, but traces of her influence endured in art, myth, and secret teachings preserved in clandestine networks. Intriguingly, her legacy intersects with the Knights Templar. These warriors, ostensibly tasked with defending pilgrims in the Holy Land, are said to have discovered relics, manuscripts, and hidden chambers connected to Magdalene. What they found may have been dangerous enough to provoke suppression by powerful institutions. Magdalene's story, therefore, exists at the crossroads of history and secrecy, public narrative and hidden truth, faith and forbidden knowledge. It is a legacy deliberately obscured, yet impossible to erase, a whisper of wisdom traveling through time, waiting to be uncovered by those willing to follow its faint, mysterious trail. Mary Magdalene's life is far more enigmatic than the canonical texts suggest. In apocryphal writings like the Gospel of Mary, she appears not as a minor follower, but as a teacher and spiritual guide, interpreting Christ's message and instructing other disciples. These texts imply she possessed knowledge about the soul, divine mysteries, and spiritual authority, knowledge that threatened hierarchical structures and the emerging church. Her suppression was deliberate. As Christianity became institutionalized, councils excluded writings that elevated her status, while church authorities recast her as a repentant sinner, downplaying her teachings and leadership. This historical erasure forced her wisdom underground, preserved in coded manuscripts, oral traditions, and allegorical art. Some legends suggest that after the events of the Gospels, Magdalene traveled to southern France, carrying sacred teachings and possibly relics, leaving traces of her presence in chapels, symbols, and local myths. Her imagery, roses, vessels, and sacred chalices, hinted at spiritual authority and continuity, creating a legacy that would later resonate with groups like the Knights Templar. Ultimately, Mary Magdalene represents a bridge between the public and hidden, the historical and the mystical. Her suppressed teachings, carefully preserved by those who understood their importance, hint at knowledge so profound it could reshape the understanding of early Christianity. She was more than a witness to Christ. She was a custodian of hidden wisdom, a figure whose influence ripples through time, quietly shaping the currents of history while remaining deliberately concealed from the mainstream narrative. Long before whispers of Mary Magdalene's secrets traveled across Europe, long before her name became entwined with clandestine orders and hidden knowledge, a new force was quietly emerging in the medieval world. The Knights Templar, known to history primarily as elite warriors of the Crusades, were far more than soldiers in armor. Their creation marked the birth of an organization that blended military prowess with spiritual guardianship, an order entrusted with protecting not only pilgrims, but also secrets that, if revealed, could reshape the course of history. The Templars were, in essence, the custodians of knowledge that intersected the tangible and the mystical, the worldly and the divine. Founded in 1119 by Hugues de Payens and a handful of fellow knights, the Templar order began as a small, devoted group sworn to protect Christian pilgrims journeying through the perilous roads of the Holy Land. Their headquarters were strategically placed on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, a site imbued with millennia of religious significance and, according to legend, home to relics and ancient texts of profound power. While their outward purpose appeared simple, the Templars' true mission was far more enigmatic. They were said to have delved into the ruins of ancient temples, excavating hidden chambers and crypts where knowledge of forgotten civilizations, sacred geometry, and mystical practices lay buried beneath layers of stone and secrecy. The Order's rapid rise to prominence was as much about their spiritual mandate as it was about political influence. Wealth poured in from donations, land holdings, and privileges granted by European monarchs, allowing them to fund architectural projects, maintain a standing army, and establish a vast network of commanderies across Europe and the Middle East. Yet, what made the Templars truly formidable was their reputation for secrecy. Initiation rituals, oaths of loyalty, and coded symbols created an inner circle of understanding, accessible only to those who had proven themselves worthy. Outside observers could see their power, but few could comprehend the depth of knowledge they protected. Legends suggest that among the secrets safeguarded by the Templars were documents and relics linked to Mary Magdalene. Some accounts claim they discovered texts suggesting her teachings contained radical interpretations of Christ's message, knowledge that could empower women, challenge hierarchical authority, and alter spiritual doctrine. Others speak of sacred vessels, possibly the legendary Grail, entrusted to Magdalene or her followers, and later hidden by the Templars for safekeeping. Whether these stories are fact, embellishment, or a mixture of both, they reveal the perception of the Templars as custodians of a hidden spiritual heritage, a bridge connecting Magdalene's enigmatic legacy to the medieval world. The Templars' influence extended beyond mere preservation. They are said to have studied the symbolic language of ancient civilizations, deciphering cryptic inscriptions, geometric patterns, and star charts that encoded profound wisdom. In their libraries, alongside manuscripts of religious significance, they reportedly kept texts detailing mystical practices, sacred rites, and instructions for spiritual enlightenment. The idea that Magdalene's own teachings, or derivatives of them, could have been among these texts has long intrigued scholars and conspiracy theorists alike. It presents a tantalizing possibility that her knowledge, once suppressed by the Church, survived through the Templar Order, concealed behind layers of ritual, secrecy, and devotion. Yet the Templars' blend of religious fervor, military discipline, and pursuit of hidden knowledge inevitably drew suspicion. Their immense wealth and autonomy, coupled with rumors of esoteric practices, positioned them as both indispensable and dangerous. Chroniclers whispered of ceremonies conducted in secret, of oaths exchanged in the shadow of sacred relics, and of knowledge so potent it could destabilize kingdoms. Whether these stories were true or fabrications designed to tarnish their reputation, they contributed to a growing aura of fear and fascination surrounding the Order. The mystique of the Templars was further amplified by their connection to the Holy Land, a place where the lines between history, legend, and prophecy seemed to blur. Excavations beneath Jerusalem's temples allegedly revealed chambers containing sacred artifacts and encoded writings, linking the Templars to a continuum of guardianship that stretched back to biblical times. In this context, Mary Magdalene's connection becomes plausible. If she had carried teachings that challenged the established church or contained spiritual authority of a hidden nature, the Templars would have been ideally positioned to protect them. Their secrecy and devotion would ensure that knowledge too dangerous for the public remained safeguarded, hidden from those who might misuse it. The fall of Jerusalem and the shifting tides of Crusader politics only heightened the Templars' sense of mission. As Western powers sought to consolidate control over lands and spiritual influence, the Templars became the invisible line protecting both people and knowledge. Their fortresses, meticulously constructed and often fortified with secret passages, hidden chambers, and coded symbols, serve as more than military strongholds. They were repositories for relics, manuscripts, and wisdom entrusted to them over centuries. In the quiet halls of these commanderies, it is said that the teachings of Mary Magdalene were studied, preserved, and even expanded upon, forming a silent lineage of esoteric understanding that existed outside the purview of church authority. As their power grew, so too did the rumors surrounding them. Tales circulated of forbidden knowledge, cryptic rituals, and sacred vessels hidden in secret locations. Some whispered that the Templars were preparing for a return of the Magdalene tradition, awaiting a time when her wisdom could be revealed once more. Others speculated that their downfall, which would come in the early 14th century, was orchestrated precisely because the order knew too much, possessed too many secrets, and safeguarded truths that those in power feared. Ultimately, the story of the Templars cannot be separated from the enigma of Mary Magdalene. To understand one is to glimpse the other. Their rise was not merely a military phenomenon, but a spiritual endeavor, a quest to protect the sacred, to guard knowledge deemed dangerous, and to maintain continuity with teachings that mainstream history sought to erase. Through the Templars, the whispers of Magdalene's hidden doctrine persisted, echoing across centuries and shaping a hidden history that continues to intrigue scholars, mystics, and seekers today. In tracing the Templars' origins, their rise, and their connection to hidden knowledge, we begin to see how history, legend, and conspiracy intertwine. They were more than knights. They were custodians of a sacred lineage, possibly one that began with Mary Magdalene herself. And it is this dual role, as both warriors and keepers of secrets, that sets the stage for their dramatic suppression, their mysterious legacy, and the enduring fascination with the treasures they may have protected. The connection between Mary Magdalene and the Knights Templar is one of history's most tantalizing enigmas, a thread that weaves together spiritual authority, hidden teachings, and the protective instincts of a secretive order. While mainstream narratives often present the Templars as purely a military force, closer examination suggests their mission may have extended into the preservation of knowledge considered dangerous, subversive, or transformative. It is in this context that Magdalene's name begins to reappear, not as a passive figure of Scripture, but as a living source of wisdom whose influence may have guided the Templars' secret endeavors. Accounts from medieval chroniclers, combined with later esoteric interpretations, hint that the Templars encountered relics and manuscripts connected to Magdalene during their campaigns in the Holy Land. Some of these sources suggest that her teachings contained profound spiritual insight, encoded in allegories and symbols, accessible only to those trained in the mystical arts of interpretation. These were not simple religious instructions. They were doctrines that challenged the rigid structures of authority, advocating spiritual equality and emphasizing knowledge as a sacred inheritance rather than a tool of control. In addition to textual evidence, symbolism within Templar architecture and iconography points to an awareness of Magdalene's role. From hidden carvings in cathedral stonework to the use of the rose and the chalice in their seals, the imagery often associated with Magdalene appears subtly throughout Templar sites. Scholars of esotericism note that these symbols were rarely decorative. They serve as encoded messages to initiates, reminders of teachings that the Church sought to suppress. Through these symbols, the Templars may have maintained a continuity of Magdalene's influence, transmitting her doctrines to a select few while ensuring they remained hidden from inquisitive outsiders. The concept of Magdalene as a teacher and spiritual authority would have been profoundly threatening to the patriarchal structure of the Church. If her wisdom promoted equality, empowered women, or revealed hidden truths about the nature of divinity, it was precisely the kind of knowledge that could destabilize centralized religious authority. The Templars' interest in her legacy, therefore, was not merely academic or ceremonial. It was protective. They may have seen themselves as guardians, tasked with ensuring that her teachings survive the centuries in secrecy, even as the Church worked to consolidate power and suppress dissenting narratives. Medieval manuscripts, such as those discovered in secretive monastic libraries, hint at networks of knowledge in which Magdalene's teachings were preserved alongside the Templars' own writings. These texts often describe allegorical journeys, coded parables, and instructions for spiritual enlightenment that parallel the mystical traditions attributed to her. Some historians argue that the Templars' fascination with relics, chalices, scrolls, and sacred vessels, was directly connected to Magdalene's story. The Holy Grail, for example, long the subject of speculation and myth, is sometimes linked to her bloodline or her spiritual authority, suggesting that the Templars' missions may have included protecting not just physical objects, but the metaphysical truths they embodied. It is also worth considering the Templars' role in preserving her teachings as part of a broader Gnostic influence. Gnosticism, with its emphasis on hidden knowledge, the divine spark within humanity, and alternative interpretations of canonical events, aligns closely with the attributes ascribed to Magdalene in apocryphal texts. The Templars, operating at the crossroads of East and West, may have absorbed these ideas and recognized the strategic importance of safeguarding her doctrine. By embedding her wisdom within their rituals, symbols, and networks, they created a living repository that could survive persecution, secrecy, and the test of centuries. Some legends go further, suggesting that Magdalene herself may have passed down instructions or entrusted relics to a trusted few who eventually became linked to the Templars. Whether these accounts are literal or symbolic, they reinforce the perception that the Templars acted as custodians, not merely of material treasure, but of spiritual inheritance. Their suppression in the early 1300s, therefore, can be seen as a calculated attempt to sever the continuity of knowledge, an effort to erase a lineage of teachings that threaten the Church's monopoly on authority. Archaeological sites associated with the Templars provide additional clues. Hidden chambers, cryptic inscriptions, and architectural anomalies suggest a deliberate design intended to conceal rather than reveal. In many cases, these sites include symbols associated with Magdalene, roses, chalices, and figures in contemplative poses, intertwined with references to the Holy Land and sacred history. These symbols functioned both as markers for initiates and as protective devices, ensuring that only those with the requisite understanding could access the deeper truths encoded within. The intertwining of Magdalene and the Templars also reflects a broader pattern in medieval Europe, where knowledge was often secretive by necessity. Political intrigue, religious conflict, and the threat of persecution created an environment in which wisdom could not safely be shared openly. Within this framework, the Templars became not only warriors but archivists, scholars, and guardians of esoteric teachings. Magdalene's doctrine, with its potential to inspire spiritual autonomy and challenge institutional control, would have been central to such a mission. Ultimately, the connection between Mary Magdalene and the Knights Templar illuminates a hidden layer of history, one in which faith, power, and secrecy intersect. It is a narrative that challenges conventional understanding, suggesting that the Templars were not merely protectors of pilgrims, but keepers of a sacred lineage, a living testament to the wisdom Magdalene carried. By examining the convergence of legend, symbolism, and surviving texts, we begin to glimpse a world in which knowledge itself was a form of treasure, guarded as fiercely as gold or silver, and perhaps even more valuable. As we follow this thread further, the story expands into realms of suppressed texts, hidden rituals, and coded messages that continue to echo through centuries. Magdalene's teachings, preserved and protected by the Templars, serve as a key to understanding a hidden history, one that the Church, history, and time itself have sought to obscure. It is a story of courage, devotion, and the relentless pursuit of knowledge, bridging the sacred and the secret, and setting the stage for revelations that would reverberate far beyond the medieval world. The preservation of Mary Magdalene's legacy by clandestine groups, such as the Templars, was a dangerous endeavor, not simply because of the perilous journeys across hostile lands, but because of the institution that would come to see her influence as a threat: the Church. The Vatican, in its effort to consolidate authority and control the narrative of Christianity, pursued a systematic campaign to suppress knowledge that challenged its emerging orthodoxy. From the early centuries of the Church to the rise of medieval Christendom, her story was meticulously rewritten, edited, and in some cases erased, leaving tantalizing fragments and echoes of a narrative that was never meant to survive in full. Evidence of this suppression appears in the selective preservation of texts. Canonical Gospels mention her only briefly, while apocryphal works that elevated her status, such as the Gospel of Mary or the Pistis Sophia, were excluded, hidden, or destroyed. Scholars suggest that these writings contain teachings emphasizing spiritual equality, the value of hidden knowledge, and insights into divine mysteries that could empower followers outside the hierarchical structure of the Church. To suppress such works was not merely an act of censorship. It was a deliberate measure to maintain power, to ensure that certain truths remained inaccessible to the masses, and that Magdalene's authority was diminished in the historical record. The Church's fear of Magdalene extended beyond written texts. Her symbolic imagery, chalices, roses, vessels, and even depictions of her as a teacher, appeared in art, architecture, and ritual across medieval Europe. In places where such symbols were strong, particularly in regions like southern France and Provence, the Church launched campaigns to root out what it deemed heretical movements. The Albigensian Crusade, though officially aimed at eradicating the Cathars, also targeted communities that preserved alternative traditions and revered figures like Magdalene. These movements often combined local spiritual practices with teachings attributed to her, creating a cultural and religious undercurrent that the Vatican found threatening. The suppression was also institutional. Councils convened in the early centuries of Christianity often debated which texts and teachings would be considered authoritative, leaving the rest to obscurity or destruction. Documents that mention Magdalene in positions of spiritual leadership were often excluded, and scribes were instructed to remove or alter passages that suggested equality between male and female disciples. Over time, her image was simplified into that of a penitent follower, loyal but subordinate, a framing that erased the radical potential of her teachings. This process of deliberate erasure created a historical silence, a gap in the record that continues to intrigue modern scholars and seekers alike. Physical persecution reinforced this suppression. Those who claimed to follow her teachings or who preserve her texts risked censure, exile, and execution. The Templars themselves, though outwardly loyal to the Church, were accused of heresy and secretly condemned during their trials in the early 14th century. Some historians speculate that one reason for their sudden downfall was their possession of knowledge connected to Magdalene, knowledge considered too dangerous for the Church to tolerate. Manuscripts, symbols, and relics, if discovered by authorities, could destabilize centuries of carefully maintained orthodoxy. The Templars' secretive rituals, their coded language, and their fortified holdings all suggest a deliberate effort to protect this knowledge from inquisitorial scrutiny. Even after the dissolution of the Templar Order, suppression continued in subtler ways. The Vatican maintained control over certain archives, limiting access to documents that might reveal the extent of Magdalene's influence. Artworks and relics associated with her were relocated, hidden, or reinterpreted to fit the sanctioned narrative. In some cases, legends persisted in folk traditions, underground movements, or secret societies, preserving echoes of her teachings without drawing the attention of ecclesiastical authorities. These clandestine efforts highlight the enduring power of her story, even in the face of systematic efforts to erase it. The tension between public and hidden history is central to understanding the Church's fear. Magdalene's narrative contained disruptive potential. It suggested that spiritual authority could exist outside the male-dominated hierarchy, that knowledge could be transmitted privately to those deemed worthy, and that sacred wisdom might be safeguarded by select custodians rather than centralized in Rome. The possibility that her teachings survived through the Templars or other secretive networks posed a direct challenge to church authority. Suppression, therefore, was not only an act of control, but also an attempt to neutralize a figure whose significance extended beyond the written word into lived practice, ritual, and lineage. This campaign of suppression also shaped the mythology surrounding Magdalene. Over centuries, the gaps created by omitted texts and altered narratives allowed legend to flourish. Tales of her travels to distant lands, her association with sacred vessels, and her role as a spiritual leader filled the void left by official histories. Paradoxically, the Church's efforts to obscure her story may have enhanced its mystique, creating a narrative rich with speculation, intrigue, and the sense that hidden truths were waiting to be discovered. Each fragment, each obscure manuscript, each coded symbol became a clue pointing to a larger reality the Church had sought to conceal. In modern times, researchers, historians, and seekers of esoteric knowledge have begun to piece together these fragments, reconstructing a Magdalene that defies conventional description. Her suppressed legacy reveals a figure of intellect, spiritual authority, and radical insight, a woman whose teachings may have transcended the limits imposed upon her by patriarchal structures. By examining the mechanisms of suppression, the destruction of texts, the persecution of followers, and the reinterpretation of imagery, we gain a clearer understanding of both the depth of the Church's fear and the enduring resilience of her story. Ultimately, the suppression of Mary Magdalene's teachings underscores the delicate interplay between power and knowledge. Her story illustrates how history is not merely recorded but curated, edited, and sometimes concealed to serve particular interests. The Templars, the secretive societies that preserved her legacy, and the surviving texts represent a resistance to that control, a testament to the idea that some knowledge, no matter how fiercely suppressed, can endure. As we trace her influence through history, we see not only the Church's attempts to contain her, but also the remarkable persistence of a legacy that continues to captivate, inspire, and challenge our understanding of the past. Throughout the centuries, legends have persisted not only in manuscripts and texts, but in tangible objects, relics, chalices, scrolls, and artifacts that many claim were touched by Mary Magdalene herself or directly linked to her teachings. These relics, shrouded in mystery and often hidden from the public eye, are said to hold not merely spiritual or symbolic value, but encoded knowledge, secrets that the Church and powerful institutions sought to keep from general awareness. The very existence of these objects has fueled speculation that Magdalene's wisdom was not only written or spoken, but preserved materially, entrusted to those who could guard it with utmost fidelity. Among the most famous of these relics is the chalice, often associated with the Holy Grail. While traditional interpretations cast the Grail as a vessel tied to Christ, alternative legends suggest that it may have belonged to Magdalene, or that it was a symbol of her spiritual lineage. Some accounts describe a vessel capable of storing divine energy, sacred knowledge, or even the bloodline of Magdalene herself, a tangible representation of spiritual authority passed down secretly through generations. The Grail, in this interpretation, is not simply an object of legend but a cipher, a material vessel for wisdom meant to survive the suppression of her story. Scrolls and manuscripts are another category of objects tied to Magdalene's legacy. Medieval Europe was home to numerous hidden libraries and monastic collections where texts outside official canon were preserved. These works, sometimes written in code, obscure languages, or symbolic imagery, are believed by some scholars to contain teachings derived from Magdalene. Within their cryptic passages are instructions on spiritual practice, allegorical histories, and guidance on the transmission of sacred knowledge. It is possible that some of these manuscripts were entrusted to the Knights Templar, who safeguarded them within fortified strongholds and commanderies across Europe. Their purpose was not only preservation, but protection, ensuring that only those prepared to understand the true meaning of the text could access them. In addition to written artifacts, the physical journey of Magdalene herself is said to have left tangible traces across the European continent. Traditions in southern France, particularly in Provence and along the Languedoc region, speak of her arrival by boat, carrying sacred relics and teaching followers in secrecy. Ancient chapels, subterranean crypts, and carvings in stone hint at her presence, with symbols such as the rose, the chalice, and the vessel recurring in sites linked to Templar influence. These artifacts and sites together form a network, suggesting that Magdalene's legacy was deliberately woven into the physical and spiritual geography of Europe, encoded in forms that would endure even under the scrutiny of church authorities. Some relics are more mysterious than others. Tales exist of small, intricately carved objects hidden in plain sight, disguised as everyday items, yet carrying symbolic weight for those initiated into Magdalene's teachings. Others, described in esoteric accounts, are said to bear inscriptions in ancient scripts or symbolic codes, legible only to those trained in mystical interpretation. These objects serve as a bridge between the tangible and intangible, suggesting that Magdalene's wisdom was not limited to words or teachings, but embedded in forms meant to transmit knowledge across generations. The care with which these relics were preserved underscores the perceived danger of their discovery and the reverence with which her memory was maintained. The Templars' involvement adds another layer to this story. Many legends claim that during excavations at the Temple Mount and other sacred sites in the Holy Land, the Templars uncovered relics, scrolls, or artifacts connected to Magdalene or early Christian mysteries. These items were not simply collected as curiosities. They were cataloged, studied, and carefully concealed. Their transfer to Europe, often through fortified commanderies in France and other regions, suggests a deliberate effort to safeguard knowledge that could be threatening if misused. In some traditions, the most precious of these items, whether a vessel, manuscript, or symbolic object, was entrusted to inner circles, protected with oaths and ritual, ensuring that its meaning would survive even centuries of persecution and suppression. The very act of hiding and protecting these relics is a testament to their perceived power. Across time, the objects associated with Magdalene became focal points of legend, inspiring both devotion and fear. Pilgrimages, secret ceremonies, and coded references in art and architecture all suggest a continuity of knowledge that was deliberately concealed from mainstream history. In many ways, the physical preservation of these items mirrors the spiritual preservation of her teachings. Both were hidden, encoded, and transmitted through guardians capable of safeguarding them against forces that might seek to destroy or suppress them. Artifacts linked to Magdalene also functioned as symbols of hope, continuity, and resistance. For secretive groups and mystics who revered her, these relics were tangible proof that knowledge could survive centuries of oppression. They were evidence that the Church's attempts to control history and spiritual authority were not absolute. The relics, in essence, became a form of rebellion, a quiet, enduring testament to a legacy that refused to be erased. Even in modern times, discoveries of ancient manuscripts, hidden symbols in cathedrals, or mysterious objects in private collections continue to hint at the survival of these secrets, demonstrating that Magdalene's influence may have been more pervasive than any historical record suggests. The interplay between physical artifacts and symbolic meaning is central to understanding the depth of Magdalene's legacy. Each relic, each vessel, each scroll represents more than an object. It embodies the teachings, authority, and spiritual lineage attributed to her. They are reminders that history is not only written in books, but also carved into stone, hidden in objects, and transmitted through acts of preservation, devotion, and secrecy. The material world, in this sense, becomes a vessel for the immaterial, a way to safeguard ideas that could otherwise be lost to time. As we follow the trail of these lost relics and hidden artifacts, a pattern emerges. They are not random. They are deliberate markers of a legacy meant to endure. Whether preserved by the Templars, hidden in remote chapels, or encoded within manuscripts, these objects are evidence of a continuity that survived suppression, persecution, and centuries of uncertainty. Each piece contributes to a larger mosaic, pointing to a Magdalene whose influence was preserved through physical means as carefully as it was through spiritual teachings. Together, they form a network of hidden knowledge, awaiting discovery, interpretation, and understanding by those willing to look beyond the official narratives of history. Across Europe, from the soaring cathedrals of France to the shadowed corridors of remote abbeys, Magdalene's presence is whispered in stone, paint, and hidden geometry. The Templars, as custodians of her teachings and relics, understood the power of symbol and architecture, not merely as decoration, but as a language, a coded map pointing toward knowledge reserved for those with insight to interpret it. Cathedrals, chapels, and monastic sites became more than places of worship. They were repositories of meaning, encoded with messages about Magdalene, her spiritual lineage, and the truths the Church sought to obscure. Every rose carved into a capital, every chalice depicted in frescoes, every labyrinth woven into a floor plan was part of a hidden dialogue between the past and those initiated into its mysteries. Hidden chambers and crypts within these sacred spaces often held the most compelling evidence. In some instances, access was restricted to a select few, protected behind heavy doors or disguised as ordinary parts of the building. Some crypts contained inscriptions in Latin or encoded alphabets, often describing rituals, spiritual teachings, or references to the Magdalene tradition. Even in cases where walls and doors have collapsed or manuscripts have been lost, traces remain. Enigmatic symbols scratched into stones, geometric patterns that mirror celestial arrangements, and subtle repetitions of iconography, pointing to hidden wisdom. Scholars and esoteric researchers argue that these features were intentional, a way of preserving teachings in plain sight while concealing their full meaning from the uninitiated. One recurring motif is the rose, frequently associated with Magdalene in esoteric traditions. In cathedral sculptures and stained glass, the rose appears as a symbol of divine wisdom, purity, and secrecy. Its recurrence in Templar sites suggests that the order used familiar symbols to create a network of hidden communication, allowing initiates to recognize locations of importance and discern patterns linking sites across vast distances. Similarly, the chalice, a symbol of spiritual inheritance and possibly the Holy Grail, is embedded subtly in carvings, paintings, and reliefs. When combined with architectural elements such as labyrinths or spiraling staircases, these symbols suggest both a physical and spiritual journey, a pathway for those seeking access to the concealed knowledge of Magdalene's legacy. Art also provides clues, sometimes in plain sight, sometimes hidden in layers of frescoes or beneath centuries of restoration. Magdalene is frequently depicted in medieval art in ways that differ from canonical representations. Rather than simply standing among apostles, she is shown holding a vessel, teaching disciples, or in contemplative isolation, suggesting spiritual authority. Her imagery often incorporates numerology, symmetry, and symbolic gestures, all of which hint at teachings encoded in visual language. These depictions were not accidental. They formed a sophisticated method of preserving knowledge that could survive centuries of suppression, transmitting meaning to those capable of decoding it. Cathedrals and Templar sites also reveal the use of spatial symbolism. Labyrinths, hidden chambers, and sacred geometry embedded in floor plans suggest that buildings themselves were designed as maps of spiritual and mystical understanding. Following these pathways, physically or symbolically, was intended to lead the seeker toward enlightenment, or at least toward a deeper comprehension of the truths Magdalene carried. In this sense, architecture became both vessel and teacher, a silent guide pointing toward hidden chambers of knowledge and sacred spaces where relics or manuscripts might be found. The recurrence of Magdalene-related symbols across multiple sites implies a coordinated effort, possibly orchestrated by the Templars or other secretive groups who revered her. Unlike public religious art, which conveyed sanctioned teachings, these hidden markers were meant for those who could interpret their layered meanings. Pilgrims or ordinary visitors might notice beauty in stained glass or carvings, but only those with initiation or knowledge could understand the deeper significance, the encoded messages, references to sacred teachings, and instructions for spiritual practice. In this way, the sacred spaces themselves became living texts, written in stone, color, and geometry, meant to endure across generations. Even today, researchers continue to uncover these symbols, often overlooked for centuries. Secret staircases, concealed compartments, and inscriptions erased or altered over time reveal a deliberate preservation of Magdalene's legacy. In some cases, modern technology such as ground-penetrating radar, digital imaging, and spectral analysis has uncovered hidden layers of meaning, confirming that the placement of symbols and artifacts was intentional and systematic. These discoveries suggest that the Templars, working within these sacred sites, were engaged in a long-term strategy, embedding Magdalene's teachings and lineage into the physical and symbolic fabric of Europe, ensuring their survival even under the scrutiny of church authorities. The implications are profound. Symbols and hidden architecture function as more than historical curiosities. They are markers of a living tradition, one that spans continents and centuries. They point toward a network of knowledge deliberately hidden yet preserved, a silent testament to the resilience of Magdalene's influence. The interplay between the visible and the concealed reflects the duality at the heart of her story, celebrated in myth, suppressed in history, but alive for those who know where and how to look. In exploring these cryptic markers, one begins to understand why the Church feared the Templars and their connection to Magdalene. These sacred spaces were not merely religious centers. They were repositories of knowledge, protection, and encoded wisdom. By concealing teachings in stone, symbol, and structure, the Templars ensured that Magdalene's legacy could endure beyond the reach of conventional authority. They created a labyrinth not just of stone, but of meaning, guiding seekers along a path toward hidden truths, connecting past, present, and future in a continuity of secrecy and devotion. Ultimately, the study of symbols and sacred spaces reveals the depth of intentionality behind Magdalene's preservation. She was not simply a figure in texts. She was embedded in the very foundations of Europe's spiritual architecture. Her teachings, encoded in art, geometry, and hidden chambers, speak to a history that has survived both time and suppression. Following these symbols is not merely an academic exercise. It is an invitation into the secret currents of spiritual and historical knowledge, into the pathways where Magdalene's legacy continues to echo, waiting to be discovered and understood. Beyond symbols, architecture, and relics, the true essence of Mary Magdalene's legacy lies in texts, writings that were often hidden, censored, or erased from the historical record. These forbidden manuscripts, some of which survived only in fragments or obscure archives, offer glimpses into teachings that diverge sharply from the orthodox narratives of the Church. They describe a Magdalene who was not merely a follower of Christ, but a teacher, a visionary, and a bearer of knowledge so profound that authorities feared its revelation. Within these texts lie allegories, parables, and coded instructions, each layer hinting at a worldview that challenged hierarchical control and invited spiritual insight beyond conventional doctrine. One of the most striking examples is the Gospel of Mary, a text that survived only in incomplete manuscripts, yet conveys a Magdalene of extraordinary authority. In its passages, she is depicted as a confidant and interpreter of Christ's teachings, offering guidance to disciples who struggle to understand his message. She speaks of inner knowledge, the ascent of the soul, and the necessity of personal insight, a stark contrast to the externalized obedience demanded by ecclesiastical authorities. The narrative suggests that she possessed not only spiritual wisdom, but also the right to teach and lead, a role historically denied to women in institutionalized religion. The existence of such texts challenges conventional perceptions of her, revealing a Magdalene whose importance extended far beyond the limited depiction in canonical scripture. Other apocryphal works, such as the Pistis Sophia and fragments of Gnostic texts, expand on this hidden knowledge. They describe interactions between Magdalene and other disciples, sometimes illustrating her as the most insightful among them, capable of interpreting the mysteries of life, death, and divine order. These writings are rich with symbolism and encoded language, suggesting that they were intended for those with the training to understand spiritual hierarchies and cosmic truths. The esoteric nature of these texts implies that Magdalene's teachings were preserved selectively, passed only to those prepared to engage with their full depth. The suppression of these texts was deliberate and systematic. Councils convened by the early church authorities sought to establish orthodoxy, deciding which works would be sanctioned and which would be condemned. Manuscripts that elevated Magdalene or conveyed her teachings independently were often hidden, destroyed, or recopied in ways that altered their original meaning. In some cases, entire libraries were lost, with only a few fragments surviving in obscure monasteries or private collections. This deliberate erasure created a veil over her legacy, forcing her wisdom into the shadows, accessible only through careful reconstruction, coded symbols, and oral tradition. The nature of these forbidden texts also suggests that Magdalene's teachings were not purely theoretical. They included practical instruction, meditative techniques, and guidance for spiritual ascent. Her writings, often couched in allegory, describe the journey of the soul, the cultivation of inner knowledge, and the recognition of a divine spark within humanity. These ideas, radical for their time, threaten the centralized authority of the Church by empowering individuals to seek enlightenment without institutional mediation. It is this empowerment, preserved in secret manuscripts, that may have motivated the Templars and other custodians to protect her works at all costs. Templar involvement in the preservation of these texts likely extended beyond mere guardianship. Accounts suggest that they studied, copied, and interpreted the manuscripts, embedding references into their own rituals and symbolic architecture. By encoding Magdalene's teachings into their seals, emblems, and sacred spaces, the Templars created a network of understanding that could survive the destruction of physical texts. In this way, knowledge was transmitted not only through words, but through symbols, architecture, and ritual, ensuring continuity despite centuries of persecution and erasure. Hidden within these writings are references to sacred lineage, spiritual authority, and perhaps even genealogical claims linked to Magdalene herself. Some texts allude to the passing of spiritual inheritance through secret channels, suggesting that her teachings were deliberately preserved as a living tradition, not confined to paper or stone. This preservation underscores a profound concern that her knowledge, if revealed indiscriminately, could disrupt the established order. Manuscripts became vessels of wisdom, guarded with oaths, secrecy, and sometimes violence, creating a tangible connection between Magdalene and those who would follow her path through the centuries. Modern scholars and researchers continue to uncover these texts, often in unexpected places: private collections, monastic libraries, and archaeological excavations. Each discovery adds fragments to the larger mosaic, revealing a Magdalene whose wisdom was both radical and enduring. Even when texts are incomplete or damaged, the patterns of symbolism, repetition, and allegory point to a coherent teaching, one that emphasizes spiritual autonomy, inner enlightenment, and the pursuit of hidden truths. These teachings form the backbone of what some describe as the Magdalene doctrine, a set of ideas that survived in secrecy, transmitted across generations by those devoted to her memory. Ultimately, the study of forbidden texts transforms our understanding of Mary Magdalene from a peripheral figure into a central authority in a hidden spiritual tradition. These manuscripts, often cloaked in allegory and obscured by centuries of suppression, reveal a Magdalene who was as much a philosopher and guide as she was a disciple. Her teachings challenge conventional hierarchies, encode esoteric wisdom, and link directly to the guardianship of the Templars, forming a network of knowledge that bridges centuries, continents, and secretive lineages. By exploring these hidden texts, we begin to glimpse the true depth of her influence, the audacity of her vision, and the reason why history, power, and authority sought to silence her voice. The fall of the Knights Templar was not a sudden collapse, but the result of a carefully staged domino sequence, engineered with precision and executed under the cover of piety. To understand why the Templars were destroyed, one has to imagine the tension building behind the scenes. Whispers in the halls of Paris, urgency in Rome, coded letters traveling between monarchs and clergy, and an undercurrent of fear spreading through the highest levels of church authority. Something about the Templars no longer fit into the structure of the medieval world, and those in power felt the pressure of a secret slipping out of their grasp. By the early 14th century, the Knights Templar had become one of the most financially and politically influential organizations in Europe. Their reach extended from Scotland to Jerusalem, and their network of preceptories acted as safe houses, banks, fortresses, and spiritual retreats. They were respected on the battlefield, trusted with royal treasuries, and connected to nearly every throne on the continent. And yet, behind this public image, rumors persisted that the order held something far more potent than wealth or influence. This is where the threads begin to twist together. Their excavations beneath the Temple Mount, their unexplained rituals, and their private teachings hinting at a Christianity that diverged subtly, but critically, from Vatican orthodoxy. The Church had tolerated the Templars for years, even admired them. Their battles against Islamic armies had been framed as holy duty. Their financial services supported papal campaigns. But in the shadows, the order had become independent, spiritually, politically, and intellectually. They no longer answered fully to Rome or to the kings they financed. And the worst fear of any authority is not an enemy, but an ally who has outgrown its leash. By 1305, King Philip IV of France was drowning in debt. He had borrowed heavily from the Templars to fund wars and royal projects. Unable to repay, he began eyeing the order's immense holdings, their farms, vineyards, commanderies, and treasuries. But more dangerous than Philip's financial desperation was his reliance on a piece of information whispered to him by advisors who had monitored the Templar rituals. They spoke of secret teachings, of hidden gospels, of practices that diverged from church dogma. Some said the Templars revered a figure whose identity threatened the very foundation of papal power. Others claimed the order protected documents capable of reshaping Christian authority, documents perhaps linked to Mary Magdalene and early, unfiltered Christian teachings. Philip knew that the Vatican shared his concerns. Pope Clement V, though outwardly supportive of the Templars, had grown increasingly uncomfortable with the order's autonomy. Their refusal to allow external investigation, their internal secrecy, and their rumored Gnostic influences irritated the papal court. Clement sensed a shift in power, a gradual movement of spiritual authority away from the Church and toward a military order that seemed to walk with quiet confidence, as if holding a truth greater than Rome's. Philip's solution was ruthless in its simplicity: eliminate the Templars, seize their treasure, and erase whatever they knew. But he needed the Church to legitimize such an action. What followed is one of the most orchestrated betrayals in medieval history, a marriage of convenience between royal desperation and ecclesiastical fear. In the early hours of a cool October morning in 1307, secret orders Philip had sent to his officials were opened across France. The instructions were clear: arrest all Templars, seize their assets, and take them into custody for interrogation. The coordination was so precise that the Templars, known for their discipline and readiness, were taken completely off guard. Overnight, they went from esteemed warriors of Christ to prisoners accused of heresy. The charges were sensational: denial of Christ, worship of strange idols, obscene rituals, corruption, sorcery. These accusations were designed not to reflect truth, but to shock the public and turn Christian sentiment against the order. In medieval Europe, heresy was considered a crime worse than treason. It was a spiritual contagion. If the Templars could be painted as corrupters of the faith, then their downfall would be justified and uncontested. But under the surface, something more subtle was happening. The interrogators pressed the Templars about their secret rites, about knowledge they had acquired in the Holy Land, about texts they might have brought back from Jerusalem. They asked repeatedly about the order's reverence for a mysterious figure, one that some scholars today link to theories involving Mary Magdalene or Gnostic teachings. The Church was not merely hunting for confessions of blasphemy. It was searching for evidence that the Templars possessed an alternative lineage of Christian truth. The brutal interrogations that followed were engineered to break the Knights physically and mentally. Confessions were extracted under torture, and many Templars admitted to whatever charges were presented simply to stop the suffering. Yet the confessions were suspiciously similar, suggesting that officials had prepared a narrative in advance. Those few Knights who refused to confess, who insisted that the order was loyal to Christ and had done nothing against church law, were treated the harshest. Their silence was interpreted as defiance, and their defiance as proof that they guarded dangerous secrets. When Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Templars, was arrested, Philip knew he had seized the most valuable piece of the puzzle. De Molay had led the order for decades and had access to its deepest archives. If anyone knew the truth about the rumored documents from Jerusalem, it was him. Yet even under immense pressure, de Molay refused to provide details that could be twisted against the order. His resistance only intensified Philip's and Clement's determination. They needed the Templars not just defeated, but discredited, erased as a threat, both physically and ideologically. The trials dragged on for years. Meanwhile, whispers circulated that certain Templar documents had vanished before the arrests, smuggled out by knights who fled France. Some spoke of a fleet disappearing from La Rochelle, loaded with chests and protected scrolls. Others claimed that the order had passed its most sacred knowledge to hidden brotherhoods scattered across Europe. Whether these stories were true or exaggerated, they terrified the Church. An enemy that has been destroyed is no threat, but an enemy whose knowledge survives becomes immortal. When de Molay was eventually led to the stake in 1314, he did something unexpected. Instead of confessing, instead of pleading, He proclaimed the innocence of the Templars and condemned both Philip and Pope Clement. His final act was defiance, a statement that the order had been condemned under false pretenses. As the flames rose, eyewitnesses claimed he looked not fearful, but resolute, as if carrying a truth he knew would outlive the men who condemned him. And indeed it did. The destruction of the Templars did not erase their legacy. It amplified it. The secrecy surrounding their fall, the coordinated nature of their arrest, and the disappearance of key documents created a vacuum filled with speculation. What was the Church so desperate to dismantle? What did the Templars know that made them a threat to kings and popes? Why did the leaders of Europe act not out of righteous indignation, but out of fear? The fall of the Templars was not the end of a military order. It was the attempt to bury a narrative, one possibly tied to Mary Magdalene, to forbidden teachings, to a version of Christianity the Vatican could not afford to acknowledge. And the more aggressively the Church tried to stamp it out, the more people began to suspect that beneath the ashes of the Templars lay a truth too dangerous to ever fully disappear. When the Templar order collapsed under the force of coordinated arrests, torture, and papal decrees, many believe that the Knights simply disappeared into history. But this is only the official version, the version recorded, approved, and repeated by the powers that orchestrated their downfall. Outside the illuminated manuscripts and court records lies another story, whispered through the centuries. The Templars may have vanished, but they did not die. The spirit of the order, and perhaps its most precious secrets, slipped quietly into the night. What followed is a chapter of history filled with shadows, rumors, and movements that refused to align neatly with the official narrative. As the Templars were being rounded up across France, something strange was happening at several of the order's commanderies. Witnesses later claimed that in the days before Philip's mass arrest, carts had been loaded, treasure rooms emptied, and Templar ships at the port of La Rochelle hurriedly prepared for departure. None of these actions fit the suddenness of the royal order. There was no way for the Templars to know with certainty what Philip planned, unless someone had warned them, or unless they had long suspected that the king's growing hostility would eventually erupt. The most persistent legend concerns the Templar fleet. According to chroniclers, the fleet stationed at La Rochelle, a port free from royal control, vanished without a trace. Not a single ship was seized. Not a single vessel was found drifting. The disappearance was total. Some modern historians argue this is merely a myth, a romantic embellishment. But others point to merchant records, port logs, and letters referencing Templar ships long after the arrests. These ships were built for long voyages, and the men who sailed them were seasoned navigators. Where they went, no one can say for certain, but theories abound. Scotland, the Baltic, Portugal, and even the distant shores of the New World. But more intriguing than the destination is what they may have carried. Not gold, not wealth, but scrolls, relics, or documents smuggled out before the king's agents could confiscate them. Across Europe, similar patterns emerged. In Aragon, England, and the German states, the Templars were arrested later than in France. This delay gave many knights time to flee, disguise themselves, or merge quietly with sympathetic noble houses. Some found refuge among the Hospitallers, who absorbed a portion of Templar assets with papal approval. Others were protected by monarchs who disagreed with Philip's aggression. And some simply vanished from the records entirely, leaving behind only rumors of a hidden network that had gone underground. There is also the matter of the Templar archives. The order maintained detailed records of its operations, finances, and spiritual teachings. These were stored in secure locations, often in heavily fortified commanderies. Yet when royal officials stormed these sites, they found little more than day-to-day ledgers. The deeper records, the ones that might have contained information from Jerusalem, discoveries made beneath the Temple Mount, or writings linked to early Christian texts, were conspicuously absent. The Church wanted these documents more than treasure. Their absence was perhaps the greatest failure of the coordinated arrests. In southern France, the situation grew even stranger. Regions with Cathar history, places long associated with heretical traditions and with medieval legends of Mary Magdalene, became centers of resistance to Templar persecution. Some local lords refused to hand over the knights. In these territories, the Templars were familiar figures, protectors rather than oppressors, and many families had long-standing loyalty to them. These communities became the seeds of a quiet diaspora, shelters where surviving knights could blend into rural life while passing down whatever knowledge they still possessed. Over time, stories emerged of masked riders traveling at night, carrying sealed chests to remote fortresses in the Pyrenees. Monks told of strangers arriving at monasteries seeking refuge, offering cryptic blessings, and disappearing without a trace. Villagers recalled meeting men who dressed like soldiers but prayed like mystics. These fragments, scattered and dim, form a mosaic of a world in which the Templars did not vanish, but simply ceased to be visible. In Portugal, the Templar legacy lived on most openly. King Denis refused to condemn the knights, believing the accusations false. To protect them, he dissolved the Templar order within his kingdom and immediately formed a new organization, the Order of Christ, which adopted the same members, same structure, and many of the same properties. It was Templar survival in everything but name. Centuries later, this same order would sponsor the voyages of Portugal's great explorers, including Henry the Navigator, whose expeditions carried a red cross strikingly similar to the old Templar emblem. Coincidence? Many believe not. They argue that through the Order of Christ, the Templars projected their influence into the age of exploration, embedding their symbols into global history. Meanwhile, in Scotland, something equally compelling occurred. The excommunicated King Robert the Bruce was already at odds with Rome. When Templar fugitives from France arrived seeking shelter, he had little reason to turn them away. Some legends claim the Templars fought alongside Bruce at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, arriving at a critical moment to turn the tide. No official record confirms this, yet Scottish tradition preserves the tale with remarkable consistency. And after the battle, several Templar-like groups emerged in the Highlands, operating quietly under local protection. What tied these scattered survivors together was not a formal organization, but shared purpose, to guard whatever truth had put them in conflict with kings and popes. This truth may have been a relic, a set of documents, or simply a spiritual teaching preserved from the earliest followers of Jesus. But whatever it was considered dangerous enough for Philip and Clement to risk political turmoil and spiritual scandal to suppress. In the centuries that followed, secret brotherhoods emerged across Europe, some claiming descent from the Templars, others adopting their symbols or rituals. Whether these groups were genuine continuations of the order or simply inspired imitations is debated. But the one consistent element in their lore is the idea of a hidden lineage of knowledge, passed quietly through generations, preserved from destruction. The Church believed it had dismantled the Templars completely. Yet the scattered survivors, the missing archives, and the enduring legends suggest otherwise. The order did not simply fall. It dispersed. It adapted. It hid in plain sight. And whatever secrets the Templars carried, especially those connected to Mary Magdalene or early Christian teachings, may have traveled with them, kept alive not by institution, but by the determination of individuals who believed some truths were worth more than their lives. For centuries after the fall of the Templars, Europe entered an age of cultural rebirth, an era historians call the Renaissance, but one that also carried subtle echoes of older, quieter revolutions. This was a time when artists, scholars, and architects began to question established truths with unprecedented subtlety. And curiously, Some of those who shaped this period seemed to possess knowledge that did not come from universities or church-approved texts. Their works glimmered with symbology that felt out of place for the age. Geometric structures, hidden figures, and expressions of the divine feminine long absent from Christian canon. It is in this environment that a strange pattern begins to appear. Across paintings, sculptures, and architectural designs, faint but persistent motifs emerge. Motifs that some believe carry encoded messages linked to Templar lore and the suppressed traditions of Mary Magdalene. These are not overt declarations. They are whispers woven into stone and pigment, subtle enough to pass beneath the eye of censors, yet powerful enough to ignite curiosity centuries later. Among the most discussed of these artists is Leonardo da Vinci, a man whose works seem almost allergic to conventional interpretation. His paintings are layered with mathematics, symbolism, and human expression. Nothing in his compositions feels accidental. Scholars have long analyzed the Last Supper, noting the absence of a traditional chalice and the presence of a feminine figure beside Christ, whose posture and form echo classical depictions of Mary Magdalene. Some historians dismiss this as coincidence, but the arrangement of hands, bodies, and gaze direction suggests otherwise, a calculated balancing of masculine and feminine energies, a quiet statement about spiritual partnership rather than hierarchical authority. Leonardo was known to study ancient texts, including apocryphal writings the Church discouraged. He moved within circles of scholars, some with rumored ties to secret societies. Though no proof exists that he had direct access to Templar knowledge, the parallels in his symbolic language raise persistent questions. It is as if he was trying to encode in his art a version of Christianity deeper and more inclusive than the one allowed by Rome. But Leonardo was not alone. Botticelli's paintings also contain elements that do not align neatly with Catholic doctrine. The Birth of Venus, ostensibly a classical mythological scene, celebrates divine feminine emergence, a concept closely tied to Gnostic ideas. His mystic nativity includes inscriptions referencing apocalyptic texts that were unorthodox for the period. Botticelli is said to have belonged to intellectual circles where discussions of forbidden theology, especially the balance of masculine and feminine divine energy, were not uncommon. Another artist, Nicolas Poussin, left perhaps the most intriguing clues. His painting The Shepherds of Arcadia depicts shepherds gathered around a tomb bearing the inscription, "Et in Arcadia ego." The phrase is enigmatic, traditionally interpreted as a reminder of mortality. But alternative readings propose something far deeper, a reference to sacred lineage or hidden burial. The tomb's geometry, the positioning of figures, and the landscape in the background align with certain Templar symbols and French locations associated with Magdalene traditions. Poussin's connections to secretive patrons further fuel speculation. A letter from a French nobleman once warned that Poussin held knowledge, which kings would struggle to extract from him. What knowledge could that be? And why would it endanger him? These artistic coincidences become more compelling when examined collectively. Renaissance artists displayed a fascination with sacred geometry, shapes and proportions believed to reflect the blueprint of creation. The Templars, according to some theories, inherited such knowledge from their time in the Levant, studying ancient structures and Jewish mysticism. If some of that knowledge survived through the diaspora described in earlier centuries, then the Renaissance would have been fertile ground for its quiet resurgence. Sacred architecture from the period adds another layer. Chapels, cathedrals, and crypts built by certain guilds contain geometric patterns reminiscent of early Christian and Templar designs. Often the positioning of windows, arches, or altars reflect star alignments or numerical sequences found in mystical texts. Some buildings include carvings of Magdalene holding a scroll or a chalice, depicted not as a repentant sinner, but as a wise teacher. These artistic choices were subtle protests against the Church's diminished portrayal of her. In several French churches, especially in the Languedoc region, the rumored refuge of Magdalene and a Templar stronghold, artists placed Magdalene in elevated or central positions normally reserved for Mary, the mother of Jesus. She is shown holding what appears to be a vessel of knowledge, her gaze steady, her posture regal. These images are not loud statements. They are gentle corrections, quiet restorations of a figure whose role was once far greater. The Vitruvian obsession of Renaissance thinkers, the desire to understand the proportions of the human body in relation to divine order, echoes Templar mysticism as well. Some believe the Templars preserved scrolls containing ancient Pythagorean or Essene teachings, which later filtered into artistic and architectural manuals. Whether or not this is true, the Renaissance undeniably became a stage for rediscovering ancient wisdom, much of which had been suppressed or forgotten. All these clues lead to an intriguing possibility. Certain Renaissance artists and architects may have considered themselves inheritors of a suppressed lineage of spiritual truth. They expressed this lineage not openly, which would have invited the wrath of the Church, but in encoded forms accessible only to those who recognize the symbols. Hidden messages embedded in frescoes, altarpieces, and manuscripts served as a quiet counterhistory. They suggested a theology where Mary Magdalene played a central role, where spiritual authority was not confined to a hierarchy, and where divine wisdom emerged through balance and unity rather than dominance and fear. These artists did not openly defy Rome, but they nudged the viewer toward alternative interpretations of sacred stories, interpretations that echoed Gnostic, Cathar, and perhaps even Templar sensibilities. This legacy can be seen in the later fascination of secret societies with Renaissance art. Groups such as the Rosicrucians and Freemasons revered these works for their hidden symbolism. They saw in them not simply aesthetic mastery, but a coded transmission of ideas that had survived centuries of suppression. Whether these societies directly inherited Templar knowledge is still debated. The lines of influence are blurred by time, secrecy, and myth. Yet the continuity of symbols, crosses, chalices, the rose, the star, the sacred feminine, forms a thread too consistent to dismiss lightly. Renaissance artists lived in a time when expressing forbidden knowledge required discretion, and so they painted worlds within worlds, visions where the divine feminine returned, where geometry spoke the language of the cosmos, and where the spiritual truths the Templars may have tried to protect found new life in color, form, and shadow. In their art, the past whispered, and those whispers continue to echo for those who know how to listen. Rennes-le-Château is a place that should have been forgotten, a tiny hilltop village nestled in the warm folds of southern France, surrounded by vineyards, quiet valleys, and ancient stones that seem to hold memories older than the landscape itself. It is the kind of town where time moves slowly, where the wind carries old stories through the cypress trees, and where the earth feels layered with secrets. Yet somehow, this unassuming village became the center of one of history's most enduring mysteries, a tangle of Templar trails, Magdalene legends, hidden manuscripts, and coded architecture. In many ways, Rennes-le-Château stands as a bridge between the medieval world of the Templars and the modern world of conspiracy theorists, researchers, and pilgrims seeking answers. The story begins not in the Middle Ages, as many expect, but in the late 19th century, when a young priest named Berenger Saunière arrived to take charge of the parish. The church he inherited, the Church of St. Mary Magdalene, was in ruins, neglected, and fading into the hillside. Saunière, by all accounts, was ambitious and curious, with a restless mind that did not match the quiet village he had been assigned. He began restoring the church, but what happened next would change Rennes-le-Château forever. During the renovations, Saunière, discovered something hidden within the old pillars near the altar. Accounts differ. Some say he found parchments containing genealogies and coded passages. Others insist he uncovered scrolls linked to the Visigoths or early Christians. And some more daring theories claim he unearthed documents left behind by the Knights Templar or the Cathars, relics that had survived centuries of suppression. Whatever he found, it was enough to transform a poor parish priest into a man of sudden, unexplained wealth. Almost overnight, Saunier began spending enormous sums of money. He renovated the church in ways that puzzled even the villagers. Bizarre statues, strange inscriptions, symbols associated with esoteric traditions, and decor that seemed deeply out of place for a rural Catholic parish. He built a lavish villa, created manicured gardens, and constructed a tower, the Tour Magdala, named after Mary Magdalene. Everything he touched reflected an obsession with secrecy, encoded messages, and spiritual symbolism. The church noticed. So did the government. Saunier's finances became the subject of an inquiry. But although he was interrogated, reprimanded, and stripped of his clerical duties, the origin of his wealth was never uncovered. Some claimed he had obtained this money through political manipulation. Others believed he had been selling indulgences illegally. But those explanations never adequately accounted for the scale of his spending or the strange behavior he exhibited afterward. It was as if he had stumbled upon a truth that weighed heavily on him, a truth that could neither be spoken nor denied. Saunier's death only deepened the mystery. On his deathbed, he reportedly attempted to give a confession so shocking that the attending priest fled from the room, refusing to grant absolution. This detail, passed down through village lore, became the spark that transformed Rennes-le-Château from an obscure pastoral community into the epicenter of countless theories. But the mystery of Rennes-le-Château did not start with Saunier. The land itself had long been steeped in stories. The region was once home to the Cathars, who believed in a form of Christianity very different from the Roman Church. The Cathars saw Mary Magdalene not as a penitent sinner, but as a teacher, a bearer of knowledge. The Vatican considered them heretics and launched the brutal Albigensian crusade to eradicate them. Many Cathars fled into the mountains or hid in fortresses throughout the area, fortresses that later became associated with the Templars. Some legends suggest that the Cathars entrusted the Templars with secret manuscripts or relics before their final massacre at Montségur. Centuries earlier, Visigothic kings had also settled in the region, reportedly bringing treasure looted from Rome, treasure that included, according to rumor, sacred objects from the early Christian era. The Templars, too, had a strong presence in nearby commanderies, and local folklore insists that Mary Magdalene herself traveled through this region after fleeing the Holy Land, preaching and teaching among the early Christians of Gaul. All these threads converge in the hills around Rennes-le-Château. It is not one mystery, but many, layered atop each other like sediment, each generation adding new interpretations, new symbols, and new stories. Take the Church of St. Mary Magdalene itself. After Saunier's renovations, the church became a tapestry of unusual imagery. A demon statue stands near the entrance, supporting a holy water font. Painted inscriptions speak of terrible secrets and hidden blessings. The Stations of the Cross depict scenes with subtle but deliberate deviations from traditional Catholic iconography. The entire building feels like a puzzle waiting to be solved, or perhaps a message waiting to be understood by the right set of eyes. Outside the church, Saunier built a tower with a library inside, a place where he spent long hours reading, studying, and writing. The tower's windows overlook the valley, a sweeping view of the land where Templars once rode and Cathars once hid. Some believe Saunier used the tower to study the very documents he had discovered, trying to unlock their secrets or interpret their meaning without drawing too much attention. Many researchers who came after him noticed geometric alignments across the landscape, a series of peaks, chapels, and ruins forming patterns that looked intentional rather than natural. These alignments echoed sacred geometry used by Templar architects. The region's place names, too, seem to hint at older narratives. In some interpretations, they form a coded map pointing toward a hidden treasure or tomb. And then there is the legend of the tomb itself. Many visitors to Rennes-le-Château are drawn by the possibility that something extraordinary lies buried in the earth. Perhaps early Christian manuscripts, perhaps relics linked to Mary Magdalene, or something more symbolic, a truth the Church had tried to bury for centuries. Some even speculate that Mary Magdalene's physical remains rest somewhere in the region, protected by centuries of secrecy. In the 20th century, writers, historians, and treasure hunters flocked to the village. Some came to follow Saunier's footsteps, others to decode the bizarre symbolism scattered across his buildings. Secret societies became involved, drawn by the possibility that Rennes-le-Château preserved traces of Templar or Grail lore. And as more people investigated, the story grew, branching into theories involving bloodlines, hidden gospels, and suppressed history. Yet the most haunting aspect of Rennes-le-Château is not the theories themselves, but the atmosphere of the place. Visitors often describe a feeling of being watched, as though the hills and stones themselves are keeping their own counsel. The village carries a profound stillness, a sense that something important once happened there and has never been properly resolved. The mystery of Rennes-le-Château is not a single answer waiting in the dark. It is a doorway, one that connects the past to the present, the visible to the hidden. Whether Saunier discovered forbidden documents, a Templar treasure, or something purely symbolic, his sudden wealth and his coded renovations turned this quiet village into a focal point for anyone seeking the threads of history that were deliberately cut. In the hills around Rennes-le-Château, truth and myth breathe the same air. And for those who come searching, the question is never simply what happened here, but why does this place refuse to let its secrets die? As the layers of the Rennes-le-Château mystery spread across centuries, a different kind of trail begins to emerge. Not one carved in stone or preserved in crumbling parchments, but embedded within language itself. Words, symbols, and names become threads of an invisible tapestry, weaving connections between the Templars, the early Christians, and the obscure manuscripts whispered about in secret circles. When the mysteries of history fade into silence, language becomes the last surviving witness, carrying echoes of forgotten truths. In the folds of these echoes lies the linguistic trail left behind for those patient and curious enough to trace it. The story begins quietly, with certain names that appear again and again, as though they were not simply historical labels, but coded markers. Numerous places around southern France bear names linked to Magdalene, the dove, the tomb, or the cross. Linguists and symbolists who studied the region began noticing repetitive structures, names that seemed intentionally layered, often blending Latin roots with Occitan, Visigothic, or Hebrew elements. Each mountain, river, and valley seemed to whisper an older meaning beneath its surface spelling. One example often cited by researchers is the way certain local names integrate the root magd, maddle, or maddle, suggesting a connection to Mary Magdalene. Whether this was simply a geographic coincidence or an intentional echo preserved over centuries is still debated. Some argue that early Christian communities revered Magdalene with a significance lost to later traditions, encoding her memory in the very landscape. According to these interpretations, the villagers and monks who named the mountains and springs may have been preserving a sacred trail, ensuring that her presence lingered even when official doctrine minimized her role. Then there are the names that involve the dove, a symbol traditionally associated with the Holy Spirit, but also tied to ancient goddess cultures predating Christianity. In Phoenician and early Mediterranean traditions, the dove was linked to Astarte, representing divine femininity, rebirth, and hidden knowledge. When similar symbols began appearing in places connected to Magdalene lore, some scholars suggested that her figure might have incorporated older mythic resonance. Whether or not these theories are accurate, the repetition of such motifs in southern France suggests a cultural memory far older than any written record. The linguistic trail expands even further when examining the manuscripts rumored to have passed through the region. Tales speak of scrolls written in a script that combined Hebrew characters with cryptic shorthand, the kind used by monastic scribes to conceal sensitive information. The Cathars, too, were said to possess texts written in a unique blend of Latin and Occitan. Many of these works were destroyed during the Albigensian Crusade, yet fragments appear in monastic inventories and royal archives. Some researchers believe Saunier might have stumbled across translations or commentaries based on these lost manuscripts. There's also the matter of the Templar ciphers, a system of symbolic shorthand the Knights allegedly used to protect routes, messages, and records. Certain markings around Rennes-le-Château resemble these ciphers: small crosses, stars, and geometric symbols carved into stones near ancient pathways. The Templars, known for their mastery of codes, often concealed information in plain sight. To them, language was not only written words, but forms woven into architecture, geometry, and spatial alignment. Some of the symbols found in the area resemble medieval sigils that doubled as map markers, pointing towards sacred sites, safe routes, or buried archives. These linguistic clues extend to the very stones of Saunier's church. His inscriptions, peculiar, poetic phrases rendered in Latin, have long been the subject of intense study. The words seem innocent at first glance, yet subtle grammatical oddities, abrupt verb choices, and unusual article placements hint at deeper meaning. It is as if Saunier deliberately wove a riddle into the fabric of the church, knowing that only those familiar with esoteric Latin would catch the inconsistencies. He may have been using language as a veil, ensuring that only the initiated could discern the truth behind the text. Some historians argue that Saunier was influenced by the linguistic cryptography used in Renaissance esoteric circles. Hidden acrostics, reverse translations, and numerical gematria were common methods for protecting sensitive theological ideas. If Saunier encountered documents linked to early Christian teachings or Templar archives, he might have adopted their approach, embedding symbolic meaning in inscriptions and architectural choices. His library, built into the Tour Magdala, was rumored to contain texts written in strange alphabets, including fragments of Hebrew, Greek, and medieval shorthand. The parishioners who glimpsed the books spoke of margins filled with notes, diagrams, and codes. Even the title he carved above the church entrance, an otherwise standard dedication, contained spacing anomalies that scholars still debate. Was it a simple artistic flourish, or was Saunier signaling that the words held a second message? Some believe the phrase functions as a key, a linguistic map pointing toward a hidden manuscript or location within the church grounds. Beyond Saunier, the larger region possesses linguistic consistencies suggestive of deliberate preservation. Many of the older place names trace back to Visigoths, who themselves had absorbed linguistic traditions from the Romans and earlier Mediterranean groups. The Visigoths were known for safeguarding treasures of knowledge, and some chronicles suggest they preserved fragments of early Christian writings. If this is true, their language may contain hints left by communities attempting to protect sacred texts during turbulent times. Considering the possibility that manuscripts were hidden in the area, one must also consider the role of oral tradition. In regions where persecution was common, whether during the suppression of the Cathars or the dissolution of the Templars, communities may have relied on coded storytelling to ensure survival. Certain words, metaphors, and narrative structures might carry meanings that escaped outsiders. Folklorists studying these oral traditions found recurring motifs involving the buried book, the hidden bride, and the mountain that listens. These metaphors, while poetic, may contain linguistic remnants of historical truth coded within the folk tales. Then there is the question of the mysterious parchments allegedly found by Saunier. The copies that surfaced in the 20th century contain puzzles based on biblical genealogies, irregular spacing, and strange patterns of letter emphasis. Though many argue these documents were later forgeries, others believe they reflect older traditions of coded writing common among monastic scribes. Whether authentic or not, these parchments contributed to a renewed fascination with linguistic codes surrounding Rennes-le-Château. Scholars began examining everything, from medieval church registers to regional legends, for signs of encryption. The linguistic trail even extends into architecture. Medieval builders sometimes used structural patterns, columns, arches, and window placements to encode theological ideas. Saunier's renovations include unusual design choices that may reflect a similar intention. The spacing between certain statues, the angles of particular pillars, and a repetition of symbolic motifs suggest that he viewed architecture as another form of language. In this sense, the church acts as a book written in stone, accessible only to those who understand its grammar. Ultimately, the linguistic clues surrounding Rennes-le-Château may not reveal a single truth, but instead suggest that the region once hosted layers of knowledge preserved through multiple forms: names, symbols, texts, architecture, and oral tradition. Each layer belongs to a different group: early Christians, Cathars, Visigoths, Templars, monks, and finally Saunier himself. All of them, knowingly or not, contributed to a linguistic map that survives even when physical documents have vanished. The power of this trail lies not in any one word or inscription, but in the cumulative weight of patterns, repetitions, and symbolic echoes. Language, in all its forms, becomes the vessel through which history refuses to remain buried. And for those who follow the threads, Rennes-le-Château becomes not merely a place, but a vast, living manuscript, one written across stone, memory, and time itself. What emerges next is a quieter but undeniably influential dimension of the Rennes-le-Château enigma, the modern legacy. It is the part of the story that spirals through the 20th and 21st centuries, shaping books, films, coded theories, and even scholarly debates. What began as a rural mystery tucked away in the rolling hills of southern France eventually evolved into a global phenomenon. And behind this transformation stand the secret of modern societies, anonymous researchers, and esoteric circles that chose to adopt the enigma as part of their own mythology. The modern legacy begins in the early to mid-1900s, when a handful of writers, archivists, and treasure hunters rediscovered Saunier's puzzling story. They were drawn not only to the strange wealth he had acquired, but to the whispers of manuscripts, hidden vaults, and forbidden knowledge linked to the Templars and Mary Magdalene. Word spread quietly at first, through letters, small publications, and conversations exchanged in dimly lit cafes in Paris or Toulouse, until an entire underground movement began forming around the mystery. Some of these individuals genuinely sought historical truth. Others chased legends, hoping to find gold, relics, or secrets capable of rewriting Christianity itself. Among these groups arose societies that remain largely anonymous. Some claimed spiritual lineage from the Templars. Others saw themselves as guardians of ancient esoteric teachings. Their members included scholars, priests, cryptographers, and those who preferred to remain in the shadows. These groups often disagreed with one another, each believing they alone possessed the correct interpretation of the Rennes-le-Château puzzle. Some viewed Saunier as a protector of truth, while others accused him of being a thief of sacred knowledge. Yet despite their differences, the secretive circles all shared one belief: that the mystery held enormous significance, one that extended far beyond treasure. It was during this period that the concept of hidden bloodlines, lost documents, and sacred feminine traditions gained attention. The theories began blending. Templar lore intersected with ancient Jewish traditions. Cathar theology merged with Gnostic symbolism, and Magdalene's legacy intertwined with ideas about suppressed spiritual authority. These theoretical intersections formed the foundation upon which modern esoteric societies built their interpretations. The story no longer belonged to one era, but stretched across centuries, merging history with myth in a way that fascinated and unsettled many. By the 1950s and 60s, several researchers had started producing private reports circulating among select circles. Some documents referenced coded maps of the region, allegedly found in old archives or purchased from antiquarian dealers. Others claimed access to letters written by Saunier or to lost diaries kept by priests who lived nearby. Certain groups even spoke of a chain of custodians, individuals who had preserved fragments of knowledge from the Templar dispersal onward. Whether these claims were legitimate or the product of imaginative storytelling remains debated. But such narratives fueled an entire esoteric movement dedicated to decoding the landscape and symbols surrounding Rennes-le-Château. Then came the Priory of Chaon, a name that still sparks debate. Whether an ancient secret order or a modern invention, its appearance in the mid-20th century electrified the mystery. Documents surfaced suggesting connections between the Priory, the Templars, the Merovingian bloodline, and hidden truths preserved through ritual and symbolism. Some researchers believe the Priory deliberately inserted itself into the narrative to guide, distort, or manipulate the evolving theories. Others think the Priory acted as a signal, hinting at buried truths without revealing them directly. Regardless of the group's authenticity, the idea of an organized society orchestrating clues and directing attention shaped the next several decades of Rennes-le-Château's modern legacy. The mystery grew from regional curiosity to international sensation in the 1980s and 90s. Writers and filmmakers seized upon the story, weaving together Saunier's wealth, cryptic inscriptions, secret societies, and the Magdalene connection into sweeping narratives. These works introduced millions of people to the puzzle for the first time, transforming Rennes-le-Château into a symbol of suppressed truth and hidden heritage. Visitors began flocking to the small village, not only searching for gold, but seeking to stand at the crossroads of history and legend. Modern esoteric groups became increasingly invested during this surge of public interest. Some saw the attention as a threat. Others viewed it as an opportunity to spread their interpretations. Several societies released statements, coded pamphlets, or symbolic artworks hinting at their beliefs. A few even published genealogical charts suggesting links between the region's ancient families and legendary bloodlines. Whether factual or fictional, these documents added layers of intrigue that blurred the boundaries between history and myth. As digital communication evolved, the mystery found a new home online. Forums, encrypted groups, and private message boards became platforms for sharing theories, photographs, and translations of obscure manuscripts. Amateur researchers from all over the world began collaborating, uncovering details scholars had overlooked for decades. Some of these individuals identified patterns in Saunier's renovations, decoding symbolic alignments between the church's statues, inscriptions, and geographical landmarks. Others studied aerial maps, discovering geometric shapes formed by the placement of ancient structures, shapes reminiscent of Templar mapping systems. At the same time, skepticism also grew. Historians and academics challenged the more dramatic claims, insisting that Saunier's wealth came from more mundane sources. They argued that many documents used to promote the mystery were modern creations. Yet even these criticisms became part of the story, adding tension and sharpening the divide between institutional history and alternative exploration. In a way, the clash between scholars and esoteric groups fed the mystery further, creating an atmosphere of controversy that kept the narrative alive. Modern societies devoted to Rennes-le-Château today vary widely. Some operate publicly, offering conferences and publications that explore the region's symbolism and history. Others function in secrecy, communicating only with trusted members and releasing information in cryptic ways. Their motivations also differ. A few genuinely seek historical truth and spiritual meaning, while others pursue the thrill of uncovering hidden codes or maintain traditions inherited from older esoteric lineages. A handful claim to possess artifacts or documents related to Mary Magdalene, or the Templars, though such claims remain unverified. Interestingly, many of these groups do not view the Rennes-le-Château mystery as static. They believe the enigma is alive, evolving, responding to new discoveries, and continuing to reveal itself selectively. Some even argue that the mystery was designed this way, functioning as an initiation pathway. According to this interpretation, the puzzle challenges the seeker to refine their perception, patience, and understanding of symbolism. Those who pursue it with integrity, they claim, are rewarded with deeper insights, while those motivated solely by greed or ambition lose themselves in endless contradictions. The lasting influence of Rennes-le-Château in popular culture cannot be overstated. It inspired countless works of fiction and nonfiction, influencing global conversations about the sacred feminine, the Grail, the Templars, and hidden histories. It reshaped how people view mythology and historical secrecy, prompting many to question the boundaries between official narratives and alternative possibilities. Even tourism in the village reflects this modern legacy. Visitors come not only for historical interest, but for a sense of connection to something larger, something ancient, something that vibrates just beneath the surface of recorded history. Today, the mystery stands at a unique intersection. The old secrets remain buried, if they exist at all, yet the modern interpretations continue to expand. Esoteric societies guard their interpretations. Scholars argue their positions. Seekers climb the hills at dawn, searching for signs in the shifting light. The legacy endures because it offers more than answers. It invites participation. It encourages exploration. And it promises that truth, once hidden, might still be rediscovered with enough curiosity, patience, and courage. What rises next is the moment the entire narrative has been quietly building toward. The convergence point where the scattered clues, whispers, and symbols begin aligning into a single thematic revelation. It is the turning of the wheel, the instant in every esoteric mystery where the fog starts to thin, and one finally glimpses something that feels like the truth reaching out from behind centuries of silence. And in this moment of convergence, a question emerges with startling clarity. Why were the Templars, the Cathars, the priests, and the guardians of hidden manuscripts all so deeply invested in Mary Magdalene? Why did her name echo through the landscapes of France and through the symbolic codes of those who guarded forbidden knowledge? Why was her image preserved by secret societies, while outwardly being downplayed or reshaped by institutional narratives? The answer begins to take shape when one considers the consistent thread running through nearly every layer of the Renoir-like tapestry. Magdalene represents something central, perhaps even foundational, to the suppressed dimensions of early Christianity. And that central truth, whether symbolic, spiritual, or literal, may explain why so many groups across so many centuries risked everything to protect it. The Templars, known for their unorthodox theology and rumored access to hidden archives beneath the Temple Mount, might have discovered documents that challenged the official narrative. The Cathars spoke openly of the divine feminine, of a Christ whose teachings emphasized inner transformation, compassion, and equality, messages that threatened the authoritarian structures of the medieval church. And the early Gnostics revered Mary Magdalene as a direct recipient of Christ's deeper teachings, a spiritual equal rather than a mere follower. This convergence reveals a pattern of suppression. Wherever Magdalene's role expanded, institutional authority contracted. The idea that she carried secret knowledge, that she embodied a partnership with Christ not based on hierarchy but unity, destabilized every patriarchal system built afterward. The idea that she might have been a teacher in her own right, or even the custodian of sacred writings lost to mainstream history, challenged the entire foundation of later traditions. And it is here, in the tension between preserved truth and controlled narrative, that the mystery gains its full gravity. The Templars, with their unprecedented access to ancient sources, may have recognized this tension. Whether they unearthed a gospel, a genealogical record, or a symbolic understanding of Christ and Magdalene's union, something they discovered shook the medieval world's spiritual architecture. The abrupt and brutal suppression of the Templars hints at something deeper than accusations of heresy, something that frightened the highest seats of power. One does not annihilate an entire order because of minor theological disagreements. Something they carried, or something they believed, threatened the core structure of religious authority. And this is where the Rennes-le-Château threads reconnect. If Saunière stumbled upon documents linking Magdalene to older, suppressed teachings, or worse, genealogical lines that survived into medieval Europe, then he might have inadvertently walked into the same storm that enveloped the Templars centuries earlier. He may have held manuscripts that echoed the same forbidden narrative, manuscripts that modern esoteric groups believe still exist somewhere beneath the hills, buried in vaults sealed before the Crusades, or hidden in crypts carved by Visigothic hands. The possibility of a bloodline, whether literal or symbolic, lies at the heart of the great reveal. It is not simply the idea of descendants, but what such a lineage implies: continuity, authority, a transmission of teachings outside the sanctioned channels, either as a biological lineage or as a lineage of spiritual succession. The concept challenges centralized control. A living legacy of Magdalene would mean the Church had no monopoly on interpretation, revelation, or divine authority. It would mean the story did not end with the Gospels, but quietly continued in hidden valleys, carried by families, secret communities, or monastic orders who protected what they believed was the unbroken light of early Christianity. The convergence deepens when considering how often Magdalene's name appears linked to France. Legends say she arrived on the southern shores, carrying teachings that found refuge among early communities seeking a purer, less authoritarian spirituality. These traditions may have influenced later groups like the Cathars, whose beliefs so thoroughly threatened the medieval church that an entire crusade was launched to wipe them out. Yet even after their destruction, their ideas survived, encoded in folklore, in architecture, in hidden rites, and in the symbols later adopted by the Templars. The reveal begins to illuminate a larger landscape, that France, and specifically the region surrounding Rennes-le-Château, was not a random stage for these mysteries, but a sanctuary. A sanctuary for ideas, a sanctuary for manuscripts, a sanctuary for a lineage of belief that existed in quiet rebellion against centralized authority. And perhaps Saunière, knowingly or unknowingly, reactivated a sleeping trail when he uncovered whatever the previous custodians had hidden. This convergence brings us to an even more profound realization, one that many modern esoteric societies cling to. The mystery is not simply about proving that Magdalene played a larger role. It is not even about treasure or relics. It is about retrieving an understanding of Christianity that predates hierarchy, conquest, and political manipulation. It is about unveiling the dimension of partnership, of masculine and feminine, of teacher and teacher, that early texts might have once described. This interpretation sees Magdalene not as an adjunct to Christ, but as part of a spiritual duality. Two teachings forming one complete vision. Perhaps the greatest fear of institutional power was not that Magdalene existed, or that she traveled to France, or even that she bore a child. The greatest fear may have been that she carried teachings that equalized power, that she embodied a dimension of the sacred few wanted acknowledged, a dimension that empowered individuals directly rather than through intermediaries. The Templars, with their emphasis on inner initiation rather than external ritual, may have embraced this dimension. The Cathars, with their emphasis on spiritual purity and equality, certainly did. Even Saunier, in his coded restorations, may have hinted at a reverence for a sacred feminine presence quietly speaking beneath the stones. And now, at this convergence point, one sees why the threads of Templar secrecy, Cathar theology, Gnostic writings, medieval inscriptions, and modern esoteric groups all return to the same symbol, Magdalene. She becomes the axis, the hidden chapter, the unacknowledged pillar of a spiritual story that was reshaped by history's louder voices. The suppressed counterpart, the missing half of an original teaching. As all these threads meet, the mystery shifts from being a treasure hunt to a revelation of meaning. The great secret may never have been gold or relics, but understanding, a rediscovery of something already present, echoing across centuries, waiting for the moment when seekers would begin connecting the fragments again. This is the threshold where the final act begins, the place where archaeology, coded language, theology, and myth merge into a single, luminous possibility. The moment where the narrative stops being about a small village priest and becomes part of a vast, hidden legacy stretching across time. As the long arc of this mystery reaches its final descent, something shifts in the atmosphere. The frantic search for clues quiets, the fever of theories cools, and what remains is a reflective stillness, the kind that follows profound discovery. It is here, in this calmer space, that the deeper truth of the Rennes-le-Chateau enigma begins to emerge, not as a singular revelation or a dramatic uncovering, but as an evolving understanding. A recognition that the Real treasure was never meant to be unearthed with shovels or solved through codes alone. The true revelation lies in the transformation that occurs when one journeys through centuries of hidden knowledge and suppressed stories, allowing the narrative to open something inside the seeker themselves. The modern pilgrim who stands at the crest of the hill overlooking Saunier's domain feels something ancient in the landscape. Not merely the weight of history, but a sense of continuity. The stones, the wind, the carved symbols, the quiet pathways, all seem to whisper that the mystery was never about proof, but about perspective. For every puzzle that remains unsolved, the surrounding stillness offers a different kind of clarity, one that suggests the story is both smaller and larger than we imagined. Smaller because it is rooted in deeply human experiences of faith, fear, secrecy, and preservation. Larger because its implications touch the very origin of Western spirituality and the fundamental human quest for meaning. The final threads of the narrative weave themselves into a realization that the unanswered questions are not failures of research or missing pieces of a vanished past. They are purposeful gaps, pauses meant to allow the mind to reach beyond the literal and into the symbolic. Every legend, every rumor of a hidden bloodline, every whisper of a lost gospel, every coded inscription seems to serve a dual purpose. On the surface, they beckon the curious, investigate, decode, seek. But on a deeper level, they reflect something inward, question, awaken, expand. This is why the mystery has endured. If it had been resolved with a chest of gold or a definitive manuscript, it would have faded into the archives of solved riddles. Instead, it persists because it mirrors the seeker. It grows, evolves, and transforms as new generations approach it with new eyes. The secret, then, is not static. It is dynamic, living, expressed differently depending on the era, the culture, and the consciousness of those who inquire. In understanding this, one begins to see the subtle genius of how such knowledge may have been protected, not through iron gates or impregnable vaults, but through narrative complexity, through layered symbolism that requires patience, intuition, and introspection to decipher. Only those prepared to approach the mystery with sincerity and humility gain access to deeper layers. Those who come seeking fame, wealth, or absolute certainty find only confusion, contradictions, and dead ends. The mystery appears to choose its reveal accordance with the intentions of the seeker. This reflective turning also highlights something profound about Mary Magdalene's role in the narrative. Whether viewed historically or symbolically, she emerges as a figure representing inner knowing, a bridge between hidden wisdom and lived experience. The traditions that centered her saw spirituality not as an external hierarchy, but as an inward relationship with the divine, accessible to all. This vision threatened structures that relied on authority and control, which may be why her significance was minimized in official narratives while preserved in esoteric ones. The Templars, Cathars, and early mystics may have gravitated toward her not because of political agendas or doctrinal rebellion, but because her story offered a spiritual path based on balance, masculine and feminine, external practice and internal awakening, action and contemplation. Her presence represents a harmony that later structures disrupted. In seeing her renewed prominence through the Rennes-le-Château mystery, one realizes that every suppressed teaching eventually finds its way back into collective awareness. Truth, especially spiritual truth, is resilient. It recirculates through the ages disguised as legend, encoded in symbols, preserved in forgotten manuscripts, and carried forward by those who intuitively feel its value. The modern seeker, standing at Saunier's domain, senses this continuity. The mystery becomes less about uncovering external secrets and more about rediscovering forgotten aspects of human consciousness. Intuition, symbolism, inner guidance, balanced wisdom. These are as much a part of the treasure as any ancient document might be. From this vantage point, the behaviors of the key historical figures make sense. The Templars protected secrets not to hoard knowledge, but to prevent distortion. The Cathars carried forward teachings that emphasized inner purity because they believed the world had drifted too far from its spiritual center. Saunier's strange renovations and cryptic decisions appear not as random eccentricities, but as expressions of someone grappling with knowledge he believed was both powerful and dangerous. Even modern esoteric groups, whether misguided or sincere, continue this ancient pattern of guarding and transmitting hidden truths through coded narratives. The reflective dimension of the mystery also reveals why such stories often invite secrecy. Not all knowledge is dangerous, but some knowledge requires maturity to comprehend. The implications of a sacred feminine lineage, a partnership model of divinity, or suppressed early Christian teachings are immense. They challenge not only institutions, but the very psychological frameworks upon which societies build meaning. To reveal such truths abruptly, without preparation, would cause chaos. To reveal them gradually, through layered narratives and symbolic breadcrumbs, encourages personal evolution before collective transformation. This realization brings the story full circle. The hills of southern France, the lonely domain of Saunier, the scattered symbols and coded inscriptions, they become a stage for a larger, timeless process, humanity's slow rediscovery of its deeper spiritual inheritance. The mystery acts as a portal, inviting seekers to reconnect with the aspects of wisdom preserved but hidden, challenged but enduring. As the seeker descends from the hill, or closes the final page of the manuscript, or stands in the quiet of the restored church, a subtle shift occurs. The mystery does not end, it internalizes. One becomes aware of how many riddles remain in history, in religion, in personal experience, and how many answers lie quietly within, waiting to be perceived. The legacy of Rennes-le-Château is not the solving of a puzzle, but the awakening of a process. The final understanding is simple and profound. The treasure was never meant to be found. It was meant to be remembered, not as a physical artifact, but as a forgotten aspect of spiritual identity. A truth that Mary Magdalene, the suppressed feminine, the hidden teachings of early mystics, and the encoded symbols of the Templars have all been silently pointing toward across centuries. And as the story closes, the seeker realizes something essential. The mystery survives because the truth it guards is not a relic buried in the earth, but a revelation buried in the human spirit, waiting, as always, for the right eyes to find it.